there, my name is Martin Wiese. We're here at the Aurora Musiklabor, my studio. Some of you guys wrote to me like, may you be the one called Martin? And that was quite funny for me because when I started out producing screencast videos, I never thought about presenting myself, but presenting my demo work. Anyways, today I want to present to you my latest demo work called Exoplanetary Sunset. All of the sounds, apart from the piano in this piece, was done with the brand new Fractals expansion for Padshop 2. Padshop, by the way, is my go-to synthesizer when it comes to pads or granular synthesis in general. But Padshop can do far more than just pads, and some of its capabilities you will see today. Let's stop the talking and just enter the session. Let me tell you a bit about the origin of this track. My impression when checking out the presets and sounds of Fractals was positive and optimistic, with a lovely potion of homecoming feel inside. To me it was crystal clear that I would compose a piece of a positive science fiction score for a movie that may not be space opera, dystopia, steampunk or anything, like epic or dark stuff. I wanted to create this good old sense of wonder in a positive way of setting foot into a new world, but with a little self-ironic aspect to it. My first idea for a title was Kepler 1649c, the name of a potentially habitable exoplanet about 300 light years away. But afterwards I ended up giving the whole thing a more poetic title. But now is the time to give you a first listen to the track. What I want to focus on today is how I used the preset sounds, how flexible and useful the presets are, how I used the new sample material coming with Fractals for a few self-designed sounds, and how all these sounds meld together to form this piece. My starting point was this synth sound that appears directly after the big pad-based intro. And this little guy is an example for how easy it is with Padshop to derive your very own and unique sounds from a given preset. Let me compare the original preset sound and my modified version for you. As you can see, the two sound sources are still the same. Let's just have a look at what happens if we solo the A layer, change the envelope settings, lifting the attack to around 13 milliseconds and throttle down the release. Let's do that. Interesting now is the sound is still different, and there this format knob comes in. Just for remembrance, there's my sound, and here's the sound where I came from, and I'm dialing up the formats. It's just a cool knob because there's so many different variations of the same sound. And there we are. I wanted to have a plucky sound for this characteristic motif. I wanted it to sound a bit like a nerdy character on a new homeworld. And doesn't this sound weird? It's this kind of sound you simply love or hate, right? There's nothing in between. And exactly that is what I was looking for while designing this specific sound. Another important aspect is the delay setting, which is identical to the one in the preset, but with this plucky and repetitive motif, it becomes an essential part of the sound because it adds space and motion to the melody. In fact, the sound is built the way extra wide rock guitars are done. Take two different amps, put them to the opposite sides of the stereo field, and play the riff twice. That's exactly what happens here. The sounds are not panned hard left and hard right. That would be too extreme for a sound that should still be in the center of the music, but it should have a certain space around itself. The delay settings emphasize that by doing the same thing, but the other way around. Look at the delay settings in A-B comparison. See, these guys over here are doing the trick. And I didn't change that. It was initially in the preset, but this was exactly what I loved when I heard that preset. Now, listen to the sound again. Two last magic tricks I did. The first was to give more of sound B into the room than of sound A. Look at that. Let's have the effect settings here. With this difference within the depth of the sound, I get this weird and nerdy aspect into the sound, like two people living inside the same body. Let's just mute A. Let's just dial this one down here. I could say simply, okay, there's no room, but room is emotion. And it's kind of far away than layer A, and so this weird and nerdy aspect comes in. Same goes to the other marginal trick. Therefore, let's check the two arpeggiator pages of sound A and B. As you can see, I added a 16th note in layer B on the second 16th note of every first downbeat to help the sound stand out, apart from just playing on different sides of the stereo field. Let's check this out mono. Hear this dagadang, dagadang, dagadang. And layer A. Here, dak, dak, dagadak. And he does. Now listen to it with both layers. These are two subtle but very important aspects of the sound you won't ever recognize within the musical context. The reason for there being two instances of ARP hook is that the melody consists of two different parts being 2 bars long, so the first part of the melody is played by ARP hook A and the second by ARP hook B. The very lovely march pattern below the synth line brings me to the percussion instances of the track, which are quite simple this time. Fractals contain some very interesting drum and percussion presets you should check out. They work great in many fields of music. This march pattern comes directly out of the box. The preset is simply called Plop Plop, and I fell in love with it the very first time I listened to it. Cool. It completely incorporates this weird feeling I already mentioned. It totally fits the need of carrying the arpeggiator synth melody. During the second half of the first part, the second percussion sound comes up throughout a high-cut filter automation. Let's listen to the frame drum sound soloed. As you can easily see, there are 2 frame drum layer sounds for the same sound. The reason for me doing this is to give the very dry and solo frame drum character of the sound a wider image. Again, layer A, left and right. You can hear while I play both of them at the same time, I get this little phasing effect. Therefore, I put the upper layer a little bit off the grid so that this phasing effect is no longer noticeable. Nice. The other trick is to play the first layer a fifth higher than the other layer. Let's have a brief look at the original preset of this frame drum pattern. The B layer sounds great for my needs. I modified the pattern to add a bit more vividness to mimic a real performance. I also panned the 2 instances a bit more left-right in the stereo field, additionally to the pan settings already done in Padshop. Within the build-up towards the outro, I added 2 more layers called frame drum alt. Let's have a look at them too. You can hear that they sound completely different, and that's to create the feel of adding a group of drums on top of the ones we've already heard. Very nice. Let's listen to the whole build-up part. Funny thing, right? The 2 layers within the context form a completely new sound. What would a Padshop expansion demo be worth without pads? So let me talk about the intro and show you what happens while soloing the pads. You can easily hear that all of the ambience and emotion is coming from these 3 pads. And within these sounds, you can hear and feel the character of the Fractals expansion. What I call mood pad is a preset I've used out of the box. It's called Homesickness and sounds exactly like what I had in mind for this long and otherworldly intro that should sound melancholic and positive in the same way. The 2 other layers I modified a bit. Let's just compare the original and the modified versions. The tape pad modification is very simple. I just kicked out layer B and changed the high pass filter to 24 dB and lowered it to 80 Hz to get a little bit more bottom at the beginning. You can also see that I changed the speed again and the duration so that the whole wave gets a little bit longer than the original one. A little but important change I did to what I call intro waves alt was to reduce the playback tempo. And I didn't just reduce it. At the beginning of the track, the setting is at about 101. Look what's happening. See? It is this effect I love within this oscillator page, that you can really stop the time. It's like within Inception, you don't know in which dimension of time you are. You could in no time switch from time is irrelevant, time goes backwards, and time slides forward. And that's what I love while scoring, and to have time really at your fingertips is a magic thing. I then changed the settings of LFO3, which affects the spectral purity. You can see in the oscillator page here too. I changed the waveform to a sine wave, and switch to 16 quarters instead of 1/2 to stretch the whole movement. I wanted to have a sound of waves here, but very slow ones. Or, as I already said, they could go forwards or backwards, like watching them in slow motion. And that's it. But these few little changes affect the music a lot. And it shows how quickly you can modify the presets to your very need, as long as you know where you want to end up. Let's now move to the build-up part again and look at the bunch of pads we have here. All of them are out-of-the-box sounds to demonstrate how many versatile and lovely pads are inside this package. Let's start with Dark Stardust. Preset, as you can see, is contouring. I call it Dark Stardust. Next one. Magnet. Next one is floating crystals. I call it sparkle pad, which is not very much apart. And the mood pad we already know. The most important thing with these layering of 4 big pads is the EQing, to make some room on the low end for the ongoing bass pattern. I wanted to have a very powerful mid-range here, so I played the full chords in many instances, although they overlay each other, but the combination of these layers creates this overwhelming sense of wonder image I've been talking about earlier. Let's now have a look at them in the editor page. See how big this sound is? Listen to them again. The basses and leads are one of the most important thing in this track. The arpeggiator bass pattern right after the first part is closely connected to the hook arpeggiator pattern we've already seen. But it's way darker and more powerful, and in a way impedes the statement of the hook arpeggiator. One and only thing I modified on the initial preset is to enhance the tube saturation in the filter section. This falls under when big is not big enough. In the build-up part, I use another bass sound which is called bass arp ground. That's pointing out what this instance does. It adds dimension to the bass line, which is melodic, while the bass ground is static. Let's listen to that. Listen to bass arp ground soloed. With static, I mean it's staying on the bass note you play. In this case D, while the bass arpeggiator pattern has its own melody. And now let's check out how all of that goes together in the mix. Maybe the most outstanding sound next to the hook arpeggiator sound is the synth lead sound. The corresponding preset is named Screaming Cat. I like this sound a lot for this case because it has some trumpet over brassy sound to it while sounding completely weird at the same time. To give it a little more dimension without making it sound flat or muddy or indefinite, I shadowed it by another preset called Nordic Pearl, not Nerdic Pearl, which would have been another great idea. Let's listen to that one. And together. And finally, check out how beautifully they blend within the mix. A last aspect I want to mention is the effects folder up here in the session. I call these kinds of sounds spice or additional flavor, supporting important form parts or make additional statements. Let's begin with the two impact sounds in the intro. Intro bass is the most important statement synth here because it is very noticeable. I took the preset sub-stab and added EQ and reverb to give it some attitude. Let's have a look at that. Look at the original. Impact over here is the additional layer in a way. These two guys both complete each other, but still work on their own. That helps not overdriving the very cliché sounding intro bass by adding some of this quirky and weird character that I wanted this track to have. Let's listen to this effect while listening to the intro again, but with, let's say, this beautiful drone here. The intro ground, which supports the drone sand sound, and both of the bass layers. intro bass and listen to what impact does and how it comments or adds dimension to this intro bass sound. And again, with all the rest of the sounds. The swells and transitions in this track are built from scratch, like I do very often, because it's way quicker while I mostly have an exact vision of the transition I want. And with Padshop, these visions easily come to life. Let's just look at this moment here where rusty swell and hit mark an important point of the track. The hit is simply made of a distorted hum sound with a nice attack done with a combination of finding the right spot of the sample to start and the envelope setting. I then only chose 2 voices in the oscillator page and added some EQ and big reverb. That's the hit. Listen to it again. The rusty swell or swell rusty is made of a dry sample called Squeaky Glitch set to 42% of speed while riding the filter knob via MIDI controller. Done is the swell. And again in the context of the track. A very last example of spice is the initial bass sound here. You've already heard that in the intro part, but I guess you wouldn't have recognized it because it's so subtle. Best thing to notice these little subtle changes to mute them. It's always funny listening to that because I'm not doing that when I'm composing, but I'm searching for the sounds, then adding them, and never listening to the whole thing without these sounds. But it's always astonishing doing that. Again, with the bass support sound? It's a totally different thing, right? You hear how important these little sounds are to tell the complete story in depth, and that the audience really enter the track and keep it there. That's been a lot, I know, but there was so much to talk about. I hope you've enjoyed the ride through my latest demo track for the really cool and outstanding new Fractals expansion for Padshop 2. Feel free to watch my other videos, and I hope to meet you guys again soon. Bye bye.